Tell me if this sounds familiar. You roll out of bed in the morning, and as soon as your feet hit the floor, it's like everything in your body feels like rusty nails, like the Tin Man. Your joints are totally talking back to you. You go through your day, sit for meetings, and your back is complaining more than a teenager who just lost phone privileges. And you used to bound upstairs 2 at a time. Remember that? But now you just feel like all you do is get winded. When you tell your friends, they're like, yeah, welcome to being in your 40s. And it's like things just fall apart. Join the club. It's time to stop believing this without question. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be detailing out if I wanted to start turning things around over the age of 40, adding muscle shape, building strength, moving more spryly with more energy in the next 6 months. This is exactly what I would do. If you're an athletic 40-something woman who loves lifting weights, challenging yourself, and doing hard shit, the Fuel Your Strength podcast is for you. You'll learn how to eat, train, and recover smarter so you build strength and muscle, have more energy, and perform better in and out of the gym. I'm strength nutrition strategist and weightlifting coach, Steph. The Fuel Your Strength podcast dives into evidence-based strategies for nutrition, training, and recovery, and why, once you're approaching your 40s and beyond, you need to do things a little differently than you did in your 20s. We're here to challenge the limiting industry narratives about what women can and should do in training and beyond. If that sounds good, hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and let's go. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're with me today on this episode. We're going to get into it here. We painted a bit of a picture in the intro, and this is really taken from a compilation of all of the things that my lifters tell me they're experiencing as they're getting to be over 40. And at the same time, it's like we just accept this as fact. And sometimes, if we're being really honest, we kind of buy the lie a little bit that this is just what it's like when you're 40 and up. And sure, we need to do things differently. We're not 20 again. But if we wanted to start moving the needle and making improvements, there are definitely some things that we could focus on in training that would start moving the needle a lot on this. So we're going to detail it out in this episode. If I had to start right now, and I've been lifting for 15 years, but if I had to start now, I'm reaching into my coach bag of tricks and my personal experience, and I'm sharing with you exactly what I would include in my workouts going forward so that I would start to make a real dent on this stuff. And side note, we also want to make sure, of course, we're taking into account our nutrition, our recovery, right? All of these things go together. But from a training point of view, these are the things that I would start doing ASAP. Just a very friendly reminder, if you're liking the podcast, you're enjoying it, appreciating the info and all the insights, then please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. It really does make a difference. And if you want a 7-day sample of Strong with Steph, which is my progressive strength training program that's purpose-built for women over 40, you can do that at stephgodrow.com/workout. We painted the picture earlier of how it feels sometimes when you wake up one day and it feels like midlife has just caught up to you and has done so in a very fucking rude way, because how you feel in the morning, how you feel when you're working, you're trying to go out and do hobbies and the things that you love to do, everything just feels harder. You feel older. And yes, we're all aging and getting older, and that's true. And we're not trying to be ageist here, but just to say, you start to notice that things really are feeling different in midlife, especially because we've been so busy throughout our 20s and 30s and careers and family and all of the things that we can also rely a little bit on the leeway that we have because we're younger. And as we get older, that wiggle room starts to fall away. So it's pretty common when I'm working with my Strong with Steph lifters that they come in, they've had some past lifting experience, and they're like, I took some time off to deal with life, and I woke up one day and just don't feel like myself. So let's kind of understand what's going on from a physiology point of view. Thinking about this insofar as the body molds to the situations we put it in. So when we stop moving like we used to, especially I mentioned, since oftentimes life gets lifey as fuck, especially in midlife, everything is hitting at the same time. We see negative adaptations in our fitness. If it's cardio and sort of our conditioning, we get deconditioned. That's why things like going up the stairs makes us feel winded, or our muscles aren't as strong as they used to be, or we start to lose muscle mass. We might feel less powerful. We have less spring in our step, or if we start to lose our balance and stumble, we may not be able to catch ourselves. So these are different ways in which we are experiencing negative adaptations. But in reality, our bodies are responding to the lack of these positive stressors that we go through when we have a sensible training program, and then we recover from them, and then we see positive adaptations. But if we don't have that, then we start to see things that are kind of going in the opposite direction. Maybe you had a period where you could kind of maintain some of your previous fitness for some amount of time, but eventually we're going to start to see that those adaptations begin to fall away. So we maybe had a plateau, and then we start to see things decline. The great news is that on the flip side of this coin, this isn't something that you're just fated to because you're in your 40s or 50s and so on. Because as you've probably inferred, with smart, well-paced and programmed strength training with enough recovery, that includes sleep and of course nutrition, your body will begin to adapt again in a positive direction when we have good training. So that's a really good thing. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a super doom and gloom kind of person and coach when it comes to this stuff. And certainly don't come from a place of shaming and it's too late and your best years are gone by and all of this stuff, because there is really good news in all of this, which is we can continue building fitness for as long as we're alive for, which is hopefully very comforting as you're thinking about it. The paradox, though, and I don't know what it is about my brain. I love the idea of paradoxes or the push-pull in a situation. So, for example, I've been thinking about this paradox a lot, right? The longer we wait to start lifting weights, doing power work, strength training, etc., building muscle, the more ground we're likely going to have to make up. Because as I mentioned, we start to see those fall-offs in adaptations. We start to have negative adaptation. Or if we're talking about cardio, we're getting deconditioned. So we do start to see that those things will begin to drop off. And we know that, especially once we start reaching our 30s, we may notice some things changing. But as we continue to age, 40s, 50s, 60s, the rate at which things are falling off may accelerate. So things like muscle mass, power, bone density, strength, and so on and so forth. So we have this paradox that, yes, the longer we wait, the more ground we may have to make up if we want to recover as much of those adaptations as possible. But also, as I just mentioned, it is truly never too late. So hopefully what you take from that is a kernel of something very positive, which is the earlier we start, the better. And I can tell you, I made this comment on Threads not too long ago, and it got so many positive sort of, yes, exactly. I wish I hadn't waited so long. And it was something like, the one regret that I hear so much from my lifters in Strong with Steph is, I wish I had started sooner. I wish I had started sooner with my strength training. Now, of course, we can't turn back the hands of time. We can't get in a time machine, although that would be nice. So we can't go back, but it's sort of in hindsight, what do we realize? And time again, people say, I wish I had started sooner. So truly, the longer we wait, the more ground we might have to make up, but also it's never too late. And the sooner we can start, the better. So this is sort of my prelude here to encourage you that if you've been kind of waiting for the perfect time, you've been waiting on the fence, you're not sure, you've been delaying for some reason, that truly the best time to start is now. The sooner we can start, the better. Strength training is not a miracle pill, but it might just be the closest thing that we have. So I'm going to start going through for you. If I had to start now, that I'm in my mid 40s, if I had to start now training fresh, I had never really done this before, or maybe had a little bit of experience many years ago when I was like, okay, it's time. I really need to get organized and start putting in some work that's going to be useful. If I wanted to add muscle shape, feel stronger, build my quickness in the next 6 months, if I wanted to get a really good crack at it and get the ball rolling, here's what I would do. I would more than likely not fall into a 6-day bodybuilding bro split where I'm in the gym lifting 6 days a week. Now, caveat, if you do want to get into bodybuilding and that is just your thing, it's your jam, it lights you up, cool, that's okay. But if you're looking for sort of this idea of generally putting on some muscle mass and adding shape, and yes, we will call that in heavy air quotes, toning. If you wanted to do that, you want to improve your strength. So getting through your day to day is easier. You want to stop experiencing all these little niggles that are keeping you out of your sport or your physical hobbies that you really love. These are the things that we would do. So probably not get on a 6-day bro split, bodybuilding split, because that's going to take a lot of your time away from you. And most of you don't have 6 days a week to go to the gym and devote to this kind of training. I'm not saying it's bad training. Again, please don't hear what I'm not saying. To quote my internet friend, Chase Carnison, he always says, please don't hear what I'm not saying, right? So I'm not saying that this is necessarily bad. I'm just saying that for a lot of people in midlife, it's just not a great fit because you don't have a lot of time. You have a lot of things competing for your attention. You have to prioritize your life and what's going on. You have unexpected things that pop up. Many of you still have kids that you're taking care of because they're still in the home, they're under 18, or they're still your dependents relying on you, or you have adult family members that you're helping to take care of. And you've got work, you've got your hobbies, you're trying to do something for your fitness so that way you feel strong enough to take care of the people in your life or do the things you love to do your hobbies and so on. So it's a lot. And most of you don't have 6 days a week to go to the gym and do lifting 6 times a week. Plus, you may need a little bit more recovery. We definitely don't need a ton of junk volume. I think it was Alex Sterner, who's been on this podcast before, who called it something like zombie training, which I love that idea of just like, I'm going to just do like a million D reps of all of these things because I was just like, think that if I do more that I'm doing a better job. And that's not necessarily true. So we don't want to fall into that junk volume thing as well. And for a lot of people, you've reached the end of the runway on things like circuits with weights. Again, for certain people, especially if you're newer, this type of training can get you to a certain point. I'm not saying it's useless. If your main goal is to get moving and you're like, all I have right now is 45 to 60 minutes and I just cannot possibly think about anything. I just need to show up to the class, to the online class, whatever it is, and I'm just going to move my body for 45, 60 minutes. If that's what you need right now, that's totally fine. And if you've been through that already and you're like, I saw good results at first because maybe you came in and you had no experience, you hadn't lifted weights at all. Yes, like we're going to see some beginner gains, of course. But you get to a point where these circuits that are advertised as strength circuits, or even to help you shred, or those no repeat sessions that have something like 20 different exercises and the rest is very, very short. Many of you pop in my inbox and you tell me the programs that you've done and you're like, okay, I got to a certain point with this and now I'm really not seeing a ton of progress. I'm not seeing the needle moving much anymore. And so if that's you, again, maybe you've kind of reached the end of the runway on that in terms of how useful it is. So maybe you decide to switch up the strength component and keep your cardio separate. So typically, again, if the point of this podcast is saying in the next 6 months, if I wanted to make as much progress with strength, muscle shape, power, feeling like I can move more quickly, then I would separate my cardio from my lifting for best results. And I wouldn't be spending 6 times a week in the gym. With lifting, I would probably be doing 2 or 3 days, maybe a 4th if I'm doing an upper lower split. But again, I even see for a lot of my hobbyist athletes, right? You're trying to run 10Ks and cycling races and triathlons, and you're a BJJ athlete, you're balancing against some other sport, then the 4 times a week can start to get a little tricky. It's not impossible. Again, I'm not saying that any of these splits are wrong or bad, but they're oftentimes not the best fit in midlife. So I tend to find for most of my lifters, 2 or 3 days of lifting done well is going to get them pretty damn far. Okay, so here's how we're going to lay this out. I just told you a bunch of things, the sort of what not to do. Here are the things I would do. Number 1, I would create a base of compound exercises to improve strength and build muscle. Now, at the beginning, you might not be working on optimal strength. You might be more working on that building muscle, maybe building some strength as a byproduct, but you're maybe not working on optimizing maximal strength because that requires generally heavier loads at less reps, but you're going to be in that neighborhood. So a base of compound exercises to improve strength, build muscle, etc. So pushing with your upper body, pulling with your upper body, hinging. So that's primarily going to be using glutes, hamstrings, etc. Squatting, some variation of squatting, some variation of lunging or unilateral type leg exercises. The more muscle you involve at one time because you're working across multiple joints, the more efficient you're going to be in using your time. So that's how I would start. I would think about, and I've used this analogy before, and I'm going to bring it back out, the cupcake. If you were going to create a perfect cupcake, you would have a nice, moist, I can't believe I just fucking said that word, a nice, moist cake base, the perfectly baked. It's not too dry. It's got the right sponginess. And I'm so waiting because British Bake Off is coming back. That you would have a beautiful base upon which to add the other accessories, right? So we generally want to think about if we're doing 2 or 3 days a week, we're going to be somehow splitting this up. Usually I do full body with my folks, again, because we're not hammering any one half of your body too much. And I didn't mention that earlier, but especially for my hobbyist athletes, you know, again, my runners, my cyclists, my pickleballers, my martial arts people, including BJJ, triathletes, et cetera, if we're hammering half of your body on any one workout, then when you go to actually practice your sport, which is where you actually improve in your sport because you're doing sport specific training, then one half of your body is always fucking annihilated. Again, it could work for some people. I'm not saying it's across the board a bad thing. I think there are people who do it really well in terms of programming, but for my lifters, we do 2 or 3 days a week and it's full body. So we're mixing those movements I just mentioned, those movement patterns, push, pull, hinge, squat, lunge, carry. Sometimes we're getting up off the ground, those sorts of things, because we are getting the most bang for our time buck. Please, you need to strengthen more than just your glutes. Okay. I've said this in a reel recently and people were like, really? Are people doing that? Yes. Okay. You can have a glute focus day if you're on a program that has glute focus day, but you're probably not going to only be doing glutes. You're going to be doing some kind of other lower body exercise that's going to work hamstrings and quads and all that stuff too. So, but please don't just do exercises that are glute isolation exercises, because when we're older, a frail upper body is definitely not a cool thing. And if you are a hobbyist athlete, like I know many of you are, you also need your upper body strength, even if your sport isn't primarily upper body dominant. So cyclists, This is one example. You've got to hold on to the handlebars. And especially if you're trying to really grind up a hill or something like that, you're moving those handlebars back and forth as you're trying to climb. So just one quick example. When it comes to reps and sets, people will want to get in the weeds on this. And I have a podcast I'm going to be doing in the future, hopefully fairly soon. I really want to make sure I'm thorough, but talking about, should I lift heavier weights or lighter weights, more reps or less reps? And a lot of this is going to come down to what's practical for most of you. Suffice to say, I program with a mix of lower to moderate reps for my Strong with Steph lifters, depending on the phase and where they are. So if they're just starting out, you're just coming into the program, you're going to see that for what we would call our main strength work, we're generally going to see more moderate reps at first because we need to build capacity and we need to give you practice with the movements. And we want to build a little bit of muscle as a nice side bonus there too. So isolation exercises aren't the only thing that we use for muscle building or hypertrophy, but suffice to say, when people generally come in, they're not going to be doing heavy doubles right out the gate. That just doesn't make sense for most of my lifters because you need to build up to that. So I tend to use a mixture of lower or more moderate reps depending on the phase and what we're focusing on. And also because it tends to be the most time efficient. Yes, you can build muscle on something like 30% of your 1 rep max. You have to do a metric fuck ton of reps. And most people don't have that time for all of their exercises to be done at super high reps. And by the way, it's also high on the discomfort scale because when loaded appropriately, you will start to have that burning in your muscles. Things start to get spicy really fast, and it's hard to keep pushing at the intensity that you need. So again, we need to also think about what's practical for people and consider that as well. The biggest thing of all of this, so talking about a base of compound exercises 2 to 3 times a week, full body, the biggest thing here is our working sets need to be high effort. No matter how many reps we're doing, we're talking about high effort work sets. And side note for those of us over 40, working to improve our range of motion over time also, because as we improve our range of motion under load, we are starting to progress that range of motion training. So only working mobility, yes, there's a place for mobility exercise, but also thinking about, are we moving with improved range of motion across the board? And sometimes, depending on where we're at in Strong with Steph, we'll do things like deficit work or standing on something and getting more stretch in the muscle, et cetera. But we generally want to work on our movement quality as well. So we're not here to just chase 1 rep maxes all day long. No, we need a good base of movement quality, good range of motion, working in a mixture of different things. So sounds simple, not always easy to write down for yourself. Number 2. Okay, so we're moving on. If I wanted to improve muscle shape, strength, quickness in the next 6 months and make meaningful progress toward that, I would include power exercises and jumping to get you moving quickly. Now, yes, we need to also be working strength, but we can start to explore power and plyometric work in a way that's realistic, but that we start to counteract some of the slowdown that you're experiencing. Because if you haven't jumped since grade school or high school, you're feeling slower, more unathletic. And even if you are like, I reject the adjective of athletic, I'm not an athletic person, but if you're noticing you're feeling less quick, you have less pep in your step, you're not taking those stairs 2 at a time anymore, it's not just in your imagination, because the quality of power is one of the first things to drop off if you don't train it. Many, many, many years ago, at this point, it's at least 15 years, there were people talking a lot about dynapenia, which is loss of power. My friend Jamie Scott is one of them. I remember being at a conference and watching him present on this, and he's talking about dynapenia. Jamie's always a little bit ahead of his time in terms of what he's talking about. And you can go back and listen to some of his podcasts that he's come on this show, and we've talked about different aspects of training. But suffice to say, the loss of power is super common, and a lot of people stop talking about it. I'm not quite sure why, what our focus became in terms of fitness, probably things like HIIT training, which ironically can help with power. But suffice to say, this stuff is important. And how do you approach it is this side question I always get. Okay, I know why this stuff's important. I should include it, but how the hell do I get started if I haven't been jumping since high school? The answer is we start you out with how well you absorb impact, doing things that are close to the ground, low to the ground, so we can start building stiffness in those tissues. We're generally not going to have you do things like repeat box jumps where you're jumping up, jumping down, jumping up, jumping down right away. We need to shore up some of those tissues. We're going to have you start working things that are less complex and build in complexity over time, starting first with more two-legged variations before working to a lot more complexity with one-legged variations or change of direction. We can also weave in upper body work, which is something a lot of people do not do. So they're not doing any upper body power work. So there are ways to start in a more controlled manner, focus on landing quality before we up the difficulty, and remembering that things like plyometrics and jumping also oftentimes include a lot of skill. So there is a skill and learning component to this as well. So we wouldn't start with the most complicated stuff at first. Imagine you were going to start learning how to figure skate. You wouldn't go in and on day one start learning triple axels. You would be learning how to stay upright on two skates and not fall down, and keeping your balance and balancing on that skate edge. I'm not quite sure why this example came to my mind because I haven't figure skated in years, but suffice to say, here we are. If I was going to program them, I would put them at the top of my workout because then I am the freshest. And in fact, this is where you see them in my Strong with Steph program. They are right at the top. And my lifters constantly tell me that at first, maybe they feel a little awkward, right? They're like, I wish I could get to the jumping part. We're spending a lot of time on the other pieces. But then when they get to the jumping part, they constantly tell me that these are some of their most fun exercises. And the upper body power work is also very popular. It's also a hit with people. Things like medicine ball slams and things like that, people tend to really, really love. And I hear that quite often. So power exercises, important as well. And then third, again, remember this thought experiment is if I was going to start off right now and I had a goal that in the next 6 months, I wanted to make some meaningful progress toward muscle shape, strength, moving more powerfully, etc., then I would add isolation work sprinkled on top of everything else I just mentioned in a supporting role. So think about it like the toppings on your cupcake, right? And I mention this here because a lot of times people are more familiar with these exercises. They're more familiar with things like bicep curls or tricep kickbacks or hamstring curls or calf raises. And these things absolutely have a place. Isolation exercises, since we're really focusing on one joint or one main muscle, we can really work to a super hard effort because generally speaking, the relative weight isn't as high as what we would do in a compound exercise. So you tend to see that those exercises are great for that mind-muscle connection. They're super common when building muscle shape and size is the goal. So we're trying to have some hypertrophy. But in general, they're not the most efficient use of our time because we're really only targeting the work to one joint at a time instead of those multi-joint compound exercises. So absolutely, isolation exercises have a place. They're just not going to be the main meat of what we're doing. So think about them like the toppings on top of the cupcake instead of the cupcake itself. Because if we wanted to address every single main muscle, then we would have to do a lot of different exercises, which would definitely increase our time spent. So use them as support, especially if you want to bring up a particular area. And I will tell you right now, biceps are the most common thing that people ask me about. So sure, include your bicep curls or other variations of bicep work, but we're just going to leave that isolation work to the end of the workout. And the reason I bring this one up specifically is because a lot of people will tell me they're doing isolation exercises at the top of the workout before their compound work. And the compound work we're doing is, again, it's like more fatiguing. It is working across multiple joints and of course muscle groups. The loads tend to be relatively higher. So if you're going to do a lat pull down, you're going to be working a heavier weight than you would a bicep curl, even though these are both technically a pulling exercise. So we want to save isolation exercises to the end. We want to do our compound work first because we are fresher. We're going to be able to get more out of it. So sometimes I hear people will have the reverse, or they're just trying to do a bunch of isolation exercises as their only main work, and it's taking a ton of time, and they're like, this is just taking forever. So all of these things have a place. They're all useful, but we need to kind of include them in the right way. So that's what I would do. I kind of just gave you the rundown. If I wanted to spend the next 6 months to really make progress with adding muscle shape, feeling stronger, feeling quicker as a woman over 40, this is what I would do. And of course, side note, yes, I would also do my cardio. I would just keep it separate from my lifting sessions. So I would make sure that at the minimum, I was hitting 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardio a week and or 75 minutes of vigorous or a combination thereof of both. We have done several podcasts on cardio, so you can definitely check those out, linked in the show notes. So to review, we talked about a base of compound exercises, generally in a full body split for most people. Over 40 is going to be the best use of your time. We talked about the importance of getting all of our movement patterns and loading them in terms of high effort for our work sets. And yes, taking appropriate rest and getting appropriate nutrition as well. We talked about including power exercises and or plyometrics and really making sure that we're building a strong base of good, solid movement and progressing that stuff wisely over time. No, we are not going to jump, haha, pun intended, into the most complex exercises, the biggest jumps, the most distance covered, all unilateral or single leg work. We're not going to go there right at the beginning, but we will build up to it over time, of course, with good programming. And thirdly, that isolation work as needed, sprinkled on top in a supporting role. All right, that does it for this episode of the podcast. If you just want somebody to lay all this out for you and tell you what to do, 2 things. First of all, try a sample of Strong with Steph. You can get a 7-day sample over at stephgodreau.com/workout. And then also check out Strong with Steph. That is my program. You can find out more about that on the website, stephgodreau.com. That's my main site. Find out more about the program, jump in, and I would love to lay it all out for you. So you can just open the app. You don't have to think about all of these details and planning all this out, because simple is not always easy, my friend. You have a ton of other stuff going on. Let's give you the best runway for progress, so you're not worrying about, am I getting an effective use out of my time? You know that you are doing stuff that's going to move you in the right direction, but you don't have to think about it and plan it all out, so you can use your precious mental real estate for all the other things that you love to do. All right, that does it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It really does help the show. And until I catch you on the next episode, you know it, stay strong.